Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It
Happy
is that
Friday.
time again. It seems like only yesterday. It was 2 weeks ago, and we were here talking to you live. But we are back. Welcome to Distributed Tea Time. I'm Adrian Howard. I'm a developer advocate at Cockroach Labs.
And I'm Rob Reed, a technical evangelist at Cockroach Labs.
Yes. So we are back today, and today we thought it would be nice to talk about testing. It's the thing that we teach everyone to do, and they don't always do it. And so we're gonna kind of go into why maybe you should, and start talking about like how you should tackle it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah,
Uh,
I've been bitten from not doing it on many occasions, as I'm sure every developer in the world has. It's much easier to write code and test later than it is to develop with code in mind, to develop with tests in mind. Not saying
yeah.
everything has to be TDD all the time. Like there has to be some flexibility, but my
So in your
goodness, it
previous
hurts.
life, you were actually an engineering manager managing a team that
At
was
one point,
yeah,
yeah,
that
yes,
was responsible for the database and the things that was happening with it, right?
yeah, yeah. So I looked after the engineering team at Lush
Okay.
with another principal engineer, and it wasn't actually my experiences there that really highlighted to me the benefits of testing, or the pitfalls of not testing rather. This goes back to 2013.
Mm.
I was working in commodities trading, and
Oh.
I created a database. I created 25 rows of absolute pristine precision data, so I could test every scenario and permutation my database could throw at me, and worked like a charm. Absolute worked like a charm until I deployed it, and I saw production amounts of data going into it, and then it absolutely fell apart, completely fell to pieces. And this was an Oracle database, so I wasn't in any way an expert at managing Oracle databases. So when it came to it, I had no idea how to performance tune it, and I can't remember. It was probably a missing index or something, but I had no idea how to fix it, and that should have been fixed way ahead of time. I should have been able to test and know that my database, or at least the application that was talking to the database, could scale elegantly and not have to worry about database size.
Yeah.
Another time I should have tested. So that speaks to the first part of what I'll be covering in the live demo. The second part is around testing your database. So what I mean by that, there's different ways you can test a database. There's structural tests in which you will test you'll basically ask, can my database fill the requirements of the business?
Sure.
So are my databases, schemas, tables, columns up to the task? It sounds like a very basic question, but like, for example, if you haven't designed your schemas right, which is kind of a level between the tables and the database, you won't be as flexible as you potentially could be. Then there's functional testing. So do the CRUD functionality, does the database fulfill the user use cases?
Mhm.
So for example, add customer. Can I add a customer? Does my database support that? Or does it fail over horrifically if I don't? And the final type is non-functional. So these are the three categories that I talk about in my book. They encapsulate things including, but not limited to, I guess, performance, resilience testing, and security. So the things that aren't necessarily related to use cases, non-functional stuff. And I've been bitten by it loads of times where you'll make an API request and you won't get an expected response back, and it's because you've missed a comma in your SQL statement or something like that. I like to keep my SQL statements in with my code because I view SQL as code. So in any API that I write, there's the API code that handles the requests, but then it ultimately boils down to a SQL statement that I'm making against the database and returning it to the user. So everything exists in the same place, but you can mock out database connections and you don't have any clue as to whether they're working or not. And I'll demonstrate that. I'll purposefully break my code, I'll run my tests, and everything will pass and everything will be perfectly fine until I introduce integration tests, and then you find out everything's balked.
So curious, that first scenario that you were talking about where you thought you covered everything, but then there was like an index. Like, were you aware of like explain plans back then? Like, because
No.
I know the first time I was using a database, it was like MS SQL, and I was writing these terrible joins and stored procedures, and I didn't know about it. So I guess
Yeah,
the
I
question
don't
is
think I
like,
was.
if had you known about explain plans and like were able to like were to run those commands, do you think that would have saved you at all?
Yeah, massively,
Yeah.
massively. If I'd have run a query, if I'd have run my queries, because I would, knowing me, I would have had a run book of queries to test against. I would have run those within explain and found that I was doing full table scans or anything hideous like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have known that there's a problem. I don't know if it was a missing index. I'm assuming,
Okay.
and that's the example I'm using today. It might have been something completely out of my hands. I
Sure.
didn't create the databases back then, and I didn't manage them. We had a team of database engineers or database developers, as we called them, who were phenomenal. But you know,
So,
not
so
everything's
that's just
created
like that's just like
perfectly.
a good general tip. Like when you're developing your database, like make sure you look at the explain plans. Like
Yeah.
the database is smart enough to know, like to tell you, it's like, hey, this is a full table scan,
Well,
and
with
that should be
Cockroach, you
like a
don't
red
have
flag.
to. You don't have to. You don't have to run manual explains in Cockroach. You should,
Yeah.
like as part of your daily development. Like it's good practice and good hygiene. But if you go to SQL, the insights
Oh, that's
in
right.
Cockroach, it will tell you if you're doing scans. And there's also a query that you can run to say, show me all the full table scans that are happening.
That's
So,
amazing.
and actually, you can disallow full table scans as
Oh,
well.
really?
So you can say, I think, disallow a full table scan if the number of rows being requested is beyond a certain threshold. So there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that that your database queries are performant.
Wow. I mean, I think our marketing is pretty spot on when we say never worry about your database again.
Yeah,
um,
it takes care of you. Yeah.
yeah.
But you can, if you're determined enough, you can shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
As with every good technology, even you can introduce memory leaks into Rust. I think if you're determined enough.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, shall we get on with your demo
do it.
then?
Yeah.
All right. Let me take you to Robland.
I hope this is big enough for everyone. If I make it any bigger, it becomes completely unusable from my side. So I'm going to do a number of things. I'll be referencing, if you see me looking here, I'm looking at the code that I'm about to copy into my terminal over here. So I'll start a database cluster. It's going to be a single in-memory, single node in-memory database. I'm setting the SQL max memory to 1 GB, and I'll need that in a minute because I'll be adding a lot of data into it. I'll create a table. It's going to be, as you'll know and love from any of my examples, they're very hideously contrived. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more space on here.
Okay.
So I'll create a table called member. It has an ID, a full name, and a contact, which is a JSON blob. So I'll create that. I'll insert myself into this. Now this is a fictional value. It is me, but I don't live in charmingly befuddled road, Englandshire. So I'll insert that.
I would believe that.
And I will run a query. So I'm going to select everyone from member, of which there's only one person at the moment, and that's me, where the contact includes a record that has a zip code of EC1 ABC, which is me.
And we're using some of those JSON tips that we talked about a few weeks ago.
I'm not using, so let's say yes for now. Yeah, I am, yeah. So I'm going to run an API now, and that should allow me to curl the database. So I'll ask for, and in fact, let me show you my code because that will make things a little bit more sensible. So this is a very simple Go app. It connects to the database. It spins up a router. I'm using Fiber. And
as all of our viewers know, Rob loves Fiber.
I do quite like Fiber.
Yeah.
It's performant. It's based on, or it's inspired by Express. So you get these like nice .get, .post, .put endpoints. So router.get and exposes a endpoint called members, which I'm doing here. So I'll call /members, and it accepts a query parameter. So in my handle get members, I get the query parameter called zip and add it to an object called contact. Now that allows me to pass it in and then use it in this kind of syntax. So I can say where my contact zip is EC1 ABC. I unmarshal the JSON, I ram it into the database, do the query, and then I select any member out whose zip matched that. So I'll run that. And as you see, we're pulling back my record, nice and snappy. Now I'm going to run a load test because I care about I care about the performance of my database. I'm using a tool called K6 for that. And the code looks like this. So I pull in some imports. I have a function called random zip, which generates a random zip between 10,000 and basically 100,000. And it makes the request, appending the zip query param, and then makes the request. And I was able to, obviously my computer's doing quite a lot at the moment, so I'm not getting as many queries as I normally would, but I'm getting around 119,000 requests in 10 seconds.
So K6 is a library for Go, and it's
written in Go. You can write tests using JavaScript.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can call any old endpoint. This could be Google, but you obviously use it against your own APIs, because if you use it against someone else's API without prior consent, that's a DDoS. Well,
that's correct. And so this is a library, like we said, written in Go. You can write tests in JavaScript, but it's specifically created to send many requests. Or is there anything else special about it?
I'm just far enough, as fast as I can. Okay. The code that I use to run it, I ask K6 do a K6 run. I want to simulate 50 concurrent users. Okay. I want to run for 10 seconds, and I'm going to get my configuration from this file. I've got a K6 tattoo.
Oh well, it must be good.
It's great.
So anybody who stops it, takes a screenshot whenever you can see his tattoos, just know that those are going to be good things to use in anything you do.
And there'll be terrible things to use in like 40 years time, apart from Cockroach Labs, the Cockroach DB.
Yeah, I mean,
like 40 years time, I'll be like, I don't even know what this one is.
That's okay. We probably won't be that great in 40 years time either. So
my book will be out of print. I've got the ISBN number of a book that no one would have ever heard of anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm happy with that. I ship to production. We go live. And then we start to see production amounts of data. So I'm going to generate data using a tool that I wrote called DG, Data Generator. We probably talked about this at length before already. And what that will do, I'm asking DG, run load configuration from this file and output a CSV file, output into the CSV directory, and generate an import statement. So if I look at the DG configuration file, the tables I'm going to generate, I'm going to generate one because I only need to generate one. I'm going to generate 500,000 members, each containing 3 columns. An ID column, which is going to be a random UUID, a full name, which is going to be a random first and second name, and a contact, which is going to be a random JSON blob. So it contains an email, a street number, prefix, street name, I don't know what street prefix is, to be honest, city, and zip. So we will get our zip. That's the crucial thing.
So I notice here that you're having the DG generate a random UUID. I know a lot of times what I do is I set the default in the database as the gen random UUID.
Guess what?
Is that going to I know that we should test the database the way we're going to use it. So is that going to affect our tests in any way if we're passing it in versus if the database?
No, not at all. Not at all. And it's a really, really good question. I added UUID in here because of force of habit. And if I was generating more data and I had tables that cared about what was in the members table, having the ID allows me to reference it in subsequent table generations. So I can generate referential data.
Nice.
So no, that's only force of habit.
Okay.
So I'll generate that CSV file, and that will go into this directory here. And I'll wait for that one to finish and overwrite this one. So that's finished. If I look at my members table, I've got a bunch of data that's already to insert, and there's 500,000 of them. And it's also generated the import statement. I don't know where the user's getting the data from, so I just add ellipsis. But anywho, now I'll start a Python server. It could be any old server. It doesn't have to be Python.
Okay.
But I'll be listening on port 3000, and I'll be serving up anything I find in the CSVs directory. So if you were to go to a browser, you would see a list of files. And that is what Cockroach will see when I do this import. So let me run an import statement now. It will import into member ID, full name, contact, the values that it gets from the member CSV file. So if I run that, that's inserted 500,000 rows. That's finished. And now I can do let's do a select. I'll run my select again.
And I don't know if it's been published yet, but you just created a video about using DG and a Python server for importing data locally, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we were going to. I don't know if we were going to publish it. I mainly made it for you and Hack the North,
Yeah.
so that people could know how to use it. But we can publish it if it would be beneficial to people.
Yeah. So if you are
So-
interested in seeing that, let us know in the comments.
Yeah. So I'm going to do another curl against the API now, and you can start to see what it used to be. And actually, it's only when we run a load test against it that it shows how critically slow this database now is. And have a look at this. Or rather, this query now is. I think that's probably fair to say.
Okay.
So we've made 20 requests in 5 seconds, 30 requests. And don't forget, by the time this bar had completed, before, we'd made 119,000 requests.
Okay.
So this is going to finish in a second. We've made 110 requests. And obviously that's completely unacceptable. No one's going to want to wait for, I think on average it took 5.75 seconds. P95 latency is 7.41 seconds, just because we couldn't get enough queries down there because we just haven't configured the table correctly.
Yeah.
And essentially this is kind of similar to
So
what happened to
can
me.
you equate that to, like, what it would feel like in real life? So I know we talk about, like, anything over, is it a second or so many milliseconds?
100 milliseconds.
100 milliseconds the
yeah.
human eye can detect. And so this would be a situation where maybe there is a sale going on at, let's say, Lush, and everybody is trying to go and add these bath bombs, right? And so
Yeah. It's actually worse than that because the amount of time. Have a look. If I make a request, if I copy this query, essentially the query that I ran earlier,
uh-huh.
it took 1 millisecond previously, and now it's taking 650 milliseconds. If I run that many times, that's essentially like a DOS, because Cockroach is having to scan every single row.
Got it.
And this is the same for any database. This isn't isolated to Cockroach at all. But it's having to, if you think you've got 1,000 concurrent requests, all taking nearly a second, that's your server, that's your database done, that's your server done. There's nothing else that can happen. So if the user experience may either be, in the very best case scenario, I have about a second before my data comes back. Worst case scenario, my data just doesn't come back. The request times out.
This could be like a million Swifties taking down a ticketing site, right?
Yeah. Or can you imagine if they're, yeah, my God, yeah. So let's do an explain on that.
All right.
And no surprise, I'm doing a full table scan. But what might be surprising to people is Cockroach suggests what I need to do in order to fix the problem. It suggests the index to create. Now, before I do that, I'm going to make the problem worse. I'm going to run a bunch more data in. And we're taking about 650 milliseconds. It's one of the last requests I made. So I'll generate more data. I'll serve it up in Python. I'll do my import again. Now there's 1 million rows in there, actually 1,000,001, including the value that I added earlier.
And we're doing this test locally, right? Like on your machine.
This is local. Yeah. This is.
Has your fan turned on yet?
No, everything's fine.
Not yet. Okay.
So that I'll do that again. And now we're taking basically double the data, double the amount of time, and that problem is only going to get worse. Like as our company gets more and more popular, we get more and more data in there. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So let's fix the problem. I will do what Cockroach asked me to do. I'll create an inverted index on member on the contact JSON field. Now this will take a couple of seconds. But what this is doing is it's allowing CockroachDB to index the data such that requests looking for anything within the contact JSON blob are going to be much quicker. So now we're taking 4 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds. And that's versus 1.2 seconds. So it's like 1,000 times, almost 1,000 times quicker. So I'll run the explain again.
Okay.
Now, no more table scan. It knows exactly what it's looking for, and my requests are taking about 2 milliseconds. So I'll make the requests again. So if I do my curl, now it's that's imperceptible to me, the amount of time that's taking to. I'll run another load test. So it's definitely more than 110 requests, which is good.
Yep.
And that's 109,000 requests. If I generate more data, and this is why I gave it as much memory as I did. Data. So now we've got 1.5 million rows in the database. I'll run the load test again. So we're not degrading now.
Okay.
And as time goes on, we'll continue to see this performance because Cockroach knows exactly where to find this data. So that's the first scenario I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Have we had any questions? Do you have any questions about that one?
Not yet, but this scenario was running your database with production level workloads.
Yeah,
Testing
with
it.
production level amounts of data.
Okay.
And also, yeah, if you're running an API, you can load test it. It's very easy to load test. And if you're running your API and it's backed by a database, you're essentially running a black box load test against your whole system.
Right.
So definitely worthwhile doing because it informs you of how your application is going to behave once it's live. Much better to know how it's going to perform.
And these parameters that you're putting into like K6 when you're running the load test, like in theory, you would want those to be as close to what you see in production.
Yep. Yeah. So 50 concurrent users hammering the database. It's not probably far off what a lot of retailers would see, but you can you can distribute these tests.
Okay.
So you can run as much work as you need to. I think there might be even a hosted version of K6 that you can use as well.
Again, we mentioned that like for this testing, we're testing kind of like the structure of the database and things like that. But what about in the case of this is a distributed system, writes are coming in and it's affecting and we have like multiple nodes. So is there any considerations we need to take for that?
Good question. So if you're running load tests and you've got in a multi-region, let's say, or like a distributed SQL database, you'd want to be generating load from wherever you anticipate users coming from.
Got it.
So that if that involved, and that might be as simple as spinning up the infrastructure for and maybe a single EC2 instance in AWS, for example, in EC1, US East 1 and US East 2, EU West 2, wherever your users are, generate load from there. And make sure that the topology patterns you've configured in Cockroach, if you've seen our previous videos, you'll know what I mean. So that's like regional by row or global tables. Make sure your topology patterns are configured correctly, because that's another thing that would highlight they're not. It would be a load test.
Oh, and where can they learn about those topology patterns?
It's almost like you prepared this. So the Cockroach DB toolbox is one way. So there's a little website I'm working on. In fact, you'll be able to see it if I bring over my screen.
Oh.
So this is the Cockroach DB toolbox I worked on with a guy called Paul Scanlon. It has a bunch of tools in there, including one called Topology Chooser. And in here, let me just close that for a second.
Not now, Roachfest. We'll talk about you later.
You can say, my cluster is a multi-region cluster. I'm going to have reads coming in from everywhere all at once, and I can tolerate a bit of write latency. It's going to suggest the global tables topology. Let's say I want to be able to tolerate slightly stale reads. Let's say I don't need accurate, like up-to-date data all the time. Maybe I do. Let's disable that. But maybe I also need to domicile my data. So it's recommended the regional tables topology pattern, and it links you to the documentation on the regional tables topology pattern.
Great.
So, but the docs have a bunch of information on this, so definitely worth investigating if you're curious.
Yep.
So that is the first one. I'll close everything off, and I'll give myself a little bit more breathing room.
And I also want to mention that if you are still curious after looking at the docs, you can find the link on the website to join our community Slack, where you can talk to our engineers, you can talk to us. Even some of the founders are hanging around in there. So join the Slack.
Right. For the next example, I'm going to spin up another database. And so that this completely fresh database. And this one is going to show the importance of integration testing. So I have another application, and it's another simple Go service. There's a little bit more to this one because I wanted to make sure that there were tests in there. I wanted to make sure that it could be integration tested. So I read in from the environment a connection string, fail if I don't get one. I spin up a connection pool to the database. I run any database migrations that I might have. So that is in here. So create product. And there's another one that deletes the product if you don't want the product table if you don't want it anymore. I create a product repo. So that is so essentially, if you want to interact with products in this API, you go through a product repo, and I define what a product repo can do with an interface. You might say that it's too early to introduce an interface, and you might be right, but I introduced an interface so that it was easy to mock, and I could, I could have like a real life implementation and a mock implementation, which you'll see in a sec. And there's two functions that it provides, an insert product and a select product. I have a real implementation of it, a new product repo DB, which takes the database connection pool and exposes the two functions which implement the interface. In Go, interface implementation is kind of like traits, I think, in Rust. So it's the other way around. So rather than saying, my class implements this interface, you actually say, you implement an interface by providing methods on your structs.
Okay.
So, the compiler knows if you haven't, and you'll get warnings if you're trying to use something that doesn't implement all of the features. But
we love type safety.
So that's the database side of things. And then I kick off a server, which again uses Fiber, and it has two endpoints this time: one to create a product, and another to get a product by its ID. And when you add a product, I read the body, I insert the product, and I return the response. If you get a product, I get the param from the URL, and I use that in the select. Very, very simple. So I'll run that. So that's my Fiber app running now. And now I've got a couple of curl commands I can run. So this one is going to create a product. I'm going to create a product called Double Espresso, whose price is $2.99. I'll take the UUID that it was created with, and I'll plug that into another query, which I'll use here, and that fetches it. So nothing particularly magical going on. And now I'll show you the tests. So I have a test which, so if I run them, let's run them. I don't need that anymore. I'll do a go test. CD. Actually, I don't even need the database anymore. That. CD into my integrated test and run. Kill that as well. Test. So that goes into the directory and runs go test. So that is my tests happy. So, but this only tests at the moment the API or the interface between the user and the service. It doesn't test anything to do with the database. So I can prove that by making a change to the repo itself. Let's change the repo, and let's, I don't know, change that. Product 2. If I run tests, shock horror, everything still works. So we have no idea that the code is fundamentally broken and will break if we ship it now. This isn't the fault of the database. This is the fault of the developer who broke this code. So let's run some integration tests now. I will show you how I do that. In my test file, I have another. Oh, this is quite a cool feature about Go. So I want to mock something, and this is the way I mock things. So I create a struct that has two functions, one for each of the functions that are defined in the interface. One called insert product, you don't have to call it func, but I call it insert product func, and one called select product func. They both satisfy the interface. Now, I attach those as I create methods on those that struct, called insert product and select product, and and essentially all it does is it calls the function that's been provided to it, if that makes any sense. So if I create my mock product, I set the insert product function to be the one I received from my test case, which happens to be just this, for example. It returns an error. So that allows me to test an error. I got an error from my database, but I didn't actually get an error from my database. I got an error from the interface of that was mocking my connection to the database. But it doesn't tell me anything about the database. So this is an integration test. This isn't a Go feature, so I'll talk about that in a second. So I have a database connection over here in a test folder. This is just the way I've implemented it. I've got a publicly global variable, and I think in tests that's probably fine. And when it gets initialized, the first time anyone tries to access this variable, this function will get called, and it will access, and I can wrap that in a sync.once to make sure it only ever happens once, but that's how it works in Go. I create the URL from my connection string. I fail if I return if I haven't got anything, so I won't be able to use it, and my test will fail. Otherwise, I run my migrations, which are exactly the same migrations that I run for my production code, and then I create the database connection call. So let's go back to my server tests. So if I do have that, or rather if I don't, and that's the case where I just run my tests normally, you'll see that we skip the integration test because I haven't asked to do an integration test. But if I do have one, I create a normal product repo that connects to the database. It uses my database connection that I created and migrated to and ran migrations for. And I treat it like a regular service. Now, obviously, I'm not setting the UUID, so I can't say assert that the body is equal to the thing that I provide. Like, I can't set the UUID, so I just assert that I got a valid UUID back. Okay. But that's good enough. Okay. So let's run the integration tests. So the integration tests are configured using Docker Compose. So I use Go. I don't know when it happened, but you can no longer compile multiple Go packages into an executable. You used to be able to build a test executable that, when run, would run your tests. It will only compile the tests into that executable. But I don't think it works like that anymore. So I package up using Go, so I've got access to Go test. I copy my code, I copy my Go mod and Go sum dependency management files, and my command when I start the container is to run Go test and test everything. And in my compose file, I've got two services. One is Cockroach, so I'm running CockroachDB as a single node in secure server, exposing ports 26257, which is the default gRPC port that you'd use to interact with Cockroach. It's on the same network as my application, and actually I can remove that because it doesn't actually do anything. My application I set the environment variable to be my test one in the same network as me, and that's it. So let's build that. If I do make test build, I run docker build using my integration file docker, which you saw a minute ago, and then let's run the test. That's going to run both of the containers. I've attached to only one of them, so I only care about seeing the logs of my app. If you don't ask it to attach, it will show you logs from Cockroach and my app.
Nice.
And we're failing, and it's because because product 2 does not exist. Now we're finally testing. This is a good test. I actually forgot that it should fail. I forgot that I changed it. So let's run that again. Let's run the test. Let's rebuild the code. And there's a lot of cache, so it's nice and quick. And run my integration test again. Now this is having to spin up the database, start Cockroach, start my app, run the migrations. So it takes a few seconds. But this is the kind of thing you'd want to run in a CI/CD pipeline to make sure you've got no.
That was my next question. Yeah.
But yeah, you can run it anywhere because there we go. So exit code 0 means everything's fine. My add product integration test passed, both of them. I've got two different ones, one to simulate a failure scenario, one to simulate a happy path. So yeah, you're about to ask about CI/CD. This is the perfect place to run it because you can put it in a GitHub action,
Mm-hmm.
and or what
Or Circle
your
CI, or is Travis still around,
Jenkins,
or Jenkins?
Travis, yeah. So your tool of choice,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, you're just running as long as it's got access to Docker. Just run Docker Compose, pass it that, and then it will just do the rest.
Right.
So very, very straightforward, and I don't think there's not much of an excuse not to do it because it is quite simple. It took me a while to figure out the first time I tried it.
Oh yeah.
And this pattern I only adopted a couple of days ago because previously I would have created a connection in each of the packages, but actually this just saves me having to. So a few moving parts,
Mm-hmm.
I grant, but once it's there, you don't have to do it again, and all of your database tests that use the database will benefit from it.
So I'm interested to know which camp you're in. Do you write your tests first, or do you write your tests after?
Had you have asked me that same question back in 2017, I would have said at the same time that I test. So at the same time I write my code. So I'll write a test, a failing test. I'll implement the code. I'll make sure that the test passes. For this, and for a lot of the personal projects I do, which seem to be the case now,
Mm-hmm.
like I do a lot of code examples for Cockroach in my role as tech evangelist, but they're never going to hit. They don't hit production.
Right.
So the way I'd normally do it is write the code, write the tests. But in a production environment, it would always be, or usually be, TDD.
Right.
But I'm never super hard on it because ultimately, sometimes we just have to apply the JFDI design pattern.
The JFDI. Oh,
They just fucking do it.
After I said it out loud, I was like, "Yep, nope, I know it now."
But then there's more to testing than just unit tests as well. Unit tests are a really critical part of testing your code and getting good coverage and confidence, because that gives you the confidence to change your code. If you haven't got tests around it, you don't know it's working at the moment. How can you change it and know that your changes are going to work as well? So it's an important tool. And yeah, but I don't want to be that person who's always harking on about TDD. You can't write any code unless you've written tests. How about you? Where do you sit? Are you that person?
Yeah, well, it like I said, like back whenever I was a real, I gotta stop saying that. I'm still a software engineer. But back whenever I was working on production code, then yeah, we would try if we had time. I got into a lot of situations where it was like, we need to get this out because somebody promised it was already done, and so we would try to write the tests first. But yeah, since I've become a developer advocate, and that's almost 10 years now, I really only write tests if it's something that I'm going to like release, like a library. So I just recently wrote the i18n backend plugin for Prisma. So if you wanted to, we covered this on one of, well, we used it in one of our apps that we did on this, but then I kind of productized it. So if you want to like be able to retrieve translations from a database using Prisma, that's really nice. I've worked on a lot of client libraries, and so all of those types of things I try to make sure are tested and have coverage. But yeah, it's very much like I wrote it and then I wrote the tests afterwards, which is
But the important thing is the tests exist.
Yeah.
I think the thing that people fall down on is if they don't write tests at the start, they don't write tests.
Yeah.
And it's quite cathartic writing a test, like seeing your coverage improve as you add tests. I think it's quite cathartic.
Yeah.
But my Git history would probably be a mess. It'd be like production code, some tests, some more tests, some more tests.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many things like as a developer that if you do it first, or you do as you write your code, it's just easier in the long run. So just on Wednesday, we hosted a Remix NYC meetup at the office, and it was all about accessibility, A11Y. And like one of the big things that came out of that is if you just program with it in mind, like it's so much easier to just add it at the beginning than to try to go back and retrofit everything. Same thing with internationalization that we talked about. I don't know, with root roast.
That was a great project. We should revisit that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about using that as kind of like our template. So there's times where I have to like write out examples of like. So right now I'm looking into using Drizzle, which is an ORM that's gotten really hot. But I'm like I need something to like write, but I don't want to do like the classic to do app. And so like maybe we'll just keep rewriting Roach Roast in these different ones. And then it's great for CockroachDB because it's built to be distributed, to be global. And so there you go.
Yeah. So you mentioned Roachfest when I was sharing my browser.
Did.
Shall I stop sharing my? I'll stop.
Well,
sharing
do you
my
want to
screen
bring
then.
up the website since it's your screen?
Yeah, can do.
So yeah, so we do want to talk about Roachfest. That is coming up. It is, oh my gosh, it's the first week of October, and I will be there. Unfortunately, it is quite the commute for Rob.
It is. It would take at
so
least an hour.
Maybe next year. Just
Yeah.
bring the whole family. It would be great.
I'm sure my wife would love traipsing around New York with a. Well, we'd have to take my daughter out to school first, which would probably be frowned upon, and she'd
Yeah.
also have a 18-month-old in tow. So
Don't doesn't everybody like in England have access to Mary Poppins? That's what I learned growing up.
no,
No.
you are once you come of age, you are informed, much to your dismay, that Mary Poppins doesn't visit every house.
Darn. Okay, yeah. So October 3rd through 4th, there is a day zero. I think there's like a reception and things like that. But there's lots of great speakers comprised of people who work at CockroachDB. Some of our founders. There's Nate, which don't miss a Nate talk because he's just got such a soothing, calm voice.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. And then we also
And
have
there's a lot
some
of
of our customers that are going to be there, and so that's always a great time. If you are using CockroachDB now, it's a great time to talk to other customers who are using CockroachDB, or there might be people there who are thinking about it and they would love to hear how you're using it and like what has happened. So on the 2nd we have a day zero, so you can go ahead and get started with the registration. A welcome reception at Art Soho, so that's going to be fun. And then we have 2 days of talks and meetings and things like that. Last year it was at our office in Chelsea, but we're getting bigger, and so now it's going to be at Tribeca 360 rooftop. It's not all of rooftop, but you can see like 360 degrees around, beautiful views of New York City, if you'll be coming in for that. But also, like, I've heard that the food is also very good, so not something you want to miss. You can still get tickets. Go to that Roachfest website, sign up, come say hi to me, and then I don't know, I'll carry around a picture of Rob like on a stick, so he'll be there virtually, or maybe an iPad. We'll just like FaceTime you in. But yeah, we'd love to have you. So Roachfest, sign up, come see all the things. And then I think lastly we're doing really good on time. So we got about 15 minutes left. But over the weekend I went to the University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario. So I crossed the border into Canada. And luckily I did not get like pulled to the side by customs because I was carrying in my bag trophies that had formerly live roaches in them. It's okay. They were.
And you're probably taking your own tea as well, weren't you? Then you carry your own dried loose leaf tea, which also looks a bit suspect in little baggies.
No, not the loose leaf. Just the packets that I steal from hotels. Look, Marriott brand has like the Taylor's brand tea, and it's so delicious. So, I take it out of the room and I carry it with me because you never know when you're gonna have a tea emergency. But we were there over the weekend. It was great talking to all of the students. We taught a workshop it was basically an introduction to SQL, but we were doing that while teaching them how to create username password authentication. And we used what we call the Fabric Stack. So that's Fast API with Python on the back end and React on the front end. Don't ask about the the B and the I. We just made that up. But that workshop, if you are interested in it, it is open source and available. We can link it if you ask. But a lot of learning about CockroachDB, a lot of people's first time using a relational database, which is pretty cool. We had about 28 projects that we had to judge, and we did pick a winner. And it's going to be very exciting because that winner is going to be joining us in 2 weeks to show off their project and have a chat with Rob and I. So make sure you mark your calendar. As soon as I get a little more information, we'll go ahead and put the scheduled stream up so you can see it. But you'll be talking with Team Broomies, and they'll be talking about their I think it's either just an iOS app or it's a for both, but they demoed it on iOS app for managing your roommates, making sure that everybody does their chores. They gamify it, and it also takes into account splitting up like the different things, like rent costs, utility costs, groceries, etc. So it's gonna be exciting. And as soon as they won, I sent a message to Rob and I was like, they used the Go backend and they used Gorm to connect to CockroachDB. So that will be fun. So stay tuned for that. Do I have anything? Was there anything else that happened? I always like to kind of like do a recap, but I think my life was just like all
life
caught up in this.
Is events at the moment.
Yeah, and then we do have CalHacks coming up next month. We have All Things Open that we'll be at. There's just a list of events. So this is events season. If you are around the country, even in Europe, we have events going on. So check us out. Maybe you'll see Rob in person if you're like in England.
I'll be at Google Next in a couple of weeks.
And is that in London?
Yeah, on I think the 11th and 12th of October.
Okay, great. Yeah, so go to Google Next, say hi to Rob. Yeah. But as always, if you have any questions that we didn't get to, I know that this will be a recording soon. Please put those into the comments. We love answering those questions. You can also tweet your question using the hashtag distributed tea time. We are monitoring that as well. And if there's anything you'd like us to kind of go more in depth about or talk about with relation to CockroachDB, distributed databases, I don't know, etc. Global applications, I think we're really big into those right now. Again, leave it in the comments or tweet at us, hashtag distributed tea time. But I think that is it for now.
I think so. Yeah, all within the hour.
All within the hour. Yeah, we did good this time. I mean, we do great every time. I'm not complaining. But yeah, so thank you for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks. And so, like they say across the pond, TTFN.
I don't think we do.
Do you?
I don't know if everyone does.
There was
ta-ta for now. Like if someone said ta-ta for now, I would know exactly what they meant.
Oh yeah, so ta-ta for now. Well, how would you? How do you sign off?
Bye.
Oi, oi,
oi, mate, innit?
Yeah. Time to go, isn't it? I don't know where that voice came from.
That's
but
majestic. Just majestic.
We're gonna.
And on that bombshell, have lovely weekends, everyone.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.